This Keloland Living segment is sponsored by Lewis Drug. Since 1942, shoppers have trusted family-owned Lewis as their neighborhood store and pharmacy. Lewis, your first stop.
It's an unfortunate fact that we live in a world that increasingly values hustle over rust.
We're told to grind, to push through, to sacrifice sleep for success.
But our next guest is here to challenge that notion. Graham Protexter is a pharmacist with Lewis Drug.
Because let's face it, getting a good night's sleep is not a luxury, it's a necessity. It's the foundation upon which our physical and mental health is built. Yes.
And everybody's listening right now because this is something we all ask, and I think a lot of people struggle with. And in fact, when you were thinking about what to talk about today, you kind of said this is one of your biggest questions.
Absolutely, yeah. There's a lot of reasons people come into the pharmacy, but sleep is definitely one of the biggest ones. In fact, really, countrywide, this is the second most common, I would say, reason that people visit the pharmacy. I get a lot of questions about this, and I think there's a lot of misconceptions, which is hopefully what I'm here to clear up a little bit today.
Break down that first misconception, which is the one that I had, regarding, I guess, the fact that there's a lot of the actual drug that's in a sleep aid, like the Unisom, is something that's also in a Tylenol PM or a
Exactly.
PM.
So really, and we'll get into a little bit some of your over-the-counter sleep options, but by far the most common is known as diphenhydramine. And how people know diphenhydramine when they go to the pharmacy is Benadryl. Okay, so this is originally used as kind of an anti-allergy, as a lot of people know, has that side effect of drowsiness. Okay, so what we do is we have all these over-the-counter sleep options. Your Unisoms, your Z-Quils, kind of those names that you're used to hearing, those are actually just containing diphenhydramine or Benadryl, as a lot of people know it.
Right, okay, so if we keep going over this, and then the other thing to think about is, do you need that? Do you need the pain medication, right?
Yeah, so that's kind of one of the topics that I wanted to talk about a little bit here today is this Tylenol PM, your Motrin PMs, kind of what I call the pain PMs. So these are combinations of pain medications as well as diphenhydramine. Okay, so a lot of people see these marketed for sleep, and they use them, they work well, and so they keep using them, maybe even sometimes on a consistent basis. The thing that they need to know is that really what's doing all the work for sleep here, that diphenhydramine, is also found kind of in these other products on their own.
Right.
So if you don't need that pain piece, that Tylenol, that Motrin, really all you're doing is taking an extra medication that you don't even need.
Right. So you're taking an extra medication you don't need, and you're probably spending more money than you need.
Exactly, yeah.
Just like a Z-Quil, what is going to run quite a bit higher.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of why I wanted to bring some of these products in. There's different branding, different names on them, maybe some that you've heard or seen on TV, so you're familiar with them. But when you go into the pharmacy and you bring them a product, a lot of times you'll see them turn it around, actually just like you're doing now, to look at the actual ingredient that's in there. Right. What you'll find when you look at a lot of these, diphenhydramine is really pulling most of the weight when it comes to making you drowsy.
These have the exact same amount.
And there are a few different ones, but a vast majority of them are going to be diphenhydramine.
And that pain med that could be combined like with the Tylenol, you don't want to continue to take that long term.
Exactly. There are circumstances in which you might want both. Maybe you have a fever, and we know that Tylenol is great for fever, but there's side effects to these over-the-counter medications as well. Tylenol specifically is one of the biggest causes of liver damage in the United States when taken incorrectly. Right. Things like Motrin, Aleve, Advil, those other pain medications can have effects on the kidneys, can increase bleeding depending on what other medications you're on. Not to say that they're unsafe, but if you don't need to be taking those medications, stick to, chat with your pharmacist and stick to what's actually doing the work here, the diphenhydramine, if we just deem it to be appropriate.
They both have diphenhydramine, 25 milligrams, and then this one has acetaminophen, 500 milligrams. And I noticed this one says, ask a doctor or pharmacist before you use if you're taking a blood thinner, if you're taking all these other things, and this doesn't have the same warnings because it doesn't have that acetaminophen in it, right?
Exactly right. So if you don't need that acetaminophen or, like I said, Motrin, Aleve, cut that out, get what you're actually needing, and like you mentioned, save a few dollars.
Okay, so let's
talk about some of the keys to a good night's sleep.
Really, and although we've kind of started by talking with a little bit of over-the-counter medication.
Yeah, because we're like right there.
Kind of my favorite thing to talk about, and this is what patients want to hear the least sometimes, is what I call sleep hygiene, or non-pharmacological options. So these are really the first line steps that you want to take if you're having difficulty sleeping. And unfortunately, they're not always the easiest ones to do. Like you guys mentioned, a lot of times that fast-paced lifestyle. So sticking to a good sleep schedule, even on weekends when you don't have to get up for work, trying to stay with the same schedule is really going to help set your body up for success, knowing when it's time to go to sleep. Paying attention to what you eat and drink, that's kind of a broad topic. Obviously, caffeine. You think about nicotine as well. A lot of people try to use something like alcohol to help induce some sleep. That can cause some difficulty with
Call
the
it a
depth
nightcap.
of sleep.
Yeah.
Exactly. So what you might think is helping is sometimes even hurting you on the back
Okay.
end of the night. So
I've wondered that about medication too, though. Can a sleep aid affect the quality of your sleep?
it's a great question. Yeah, so a lot of these are based on helping you fall asleep. Sometimes not necessarily staying asleep is maybe what the problem that people have. This is why a lot of times when I get questions on this, I recommend kind of short duration. Okay, so specifically with diphenhydramine, you maybe do 3 or 4 days. It's good to take a day or two off to kind of see if that problem that was causing this initially has resolved. Okay, if you take this in the long term, sometimes it's kind of hard to see what your baseline is. You become a little bit even sometimes dependent on the drowsiness that you get from that diphenhydramine.
What about like a melatonin, that like those types of
I was
things?
going to say, yeah, melatonin. Go ahead.
A great question, and that's one I get a lot of questions on. It's one I feel really comfortable recommending for people to try. Melatonin is a naturally occurring, in the body. And so it's relatively safe. Melatonin is something that tends to increase as you get later in the day and it gets a little darker. So the benefit of taking melatonin, if you take this correctly, you want to decrease light intake after that, and it helps induce a little bit of drowsiness. This can range in the pharmacy. Feel free to ask your pharmacist. You'll find 1 milligram. You'll find up to 12 milligram on the shelf. So there's a lot of different dosage forms. There's sublingual tablets. There's gummies. There's a lot of different options. This is one that I do feel pretty safe, recommending to people if they want to try something to start with, because it's relatively safe. I don't always see a ton of success with it. It just depends on the person.
For some
people
reason,
like
I think
it.
the sublingual is the only one that works for me. Is that in my head, or is there something to say?
Well, the benefit to it is
Yeah.
that it doesn't really matter if it's in your head or not. If it helps you go to sleep,
true.
I think for some people, this kind of goes back to, I compare this a lot to that sleep hygiene that I talked about, with having a little bit of a bedtime routine or kind of preparing your body. If that is part of your bedtime routine, I think for some people that helps them kind of get into the rhythm of going to bed. So there is a little bit of absorption sometimes. Some people tolerate some things better than others. If you're ever doing this with younger kids, sometimes
Yeah.
they prefer a gummy of sorts. So
Yeah.
there's different thoughts there.
We could have you come back probably and talk exclusively about this as it relates to children, because my mind is already going to that kind of thing.
Or even trying to get the TV out of the bed routine
Yeah,
and
there's
things
all
like that.
kinds.
Which
That's
is
a
hard to
very
do.
common one. Smartphones, obviously, another big one, or tablets.
light away.
Exactly.
All right, well, thank
Thanks
you
so
for
much.
being here today.
Yeah,
Lots
thank
of
you
good
guys.
information.
Thank you guys for having me.
With 62 locations across the upper Midwest, Lewis has been a trusted neighborhood pharmacy and market leader for over 80 years.
From expert advice and quick refills to longer hours and more convenient locations, you can find the neighborhood pharmacy nearest you online at lewisdrug.com.
This Keloland Living segment has been sponsored by Lewis Drug. Since 1942, shoppers have trusted family-owned Lewis and their neighborhood store and pharmacy. Lewis, your first stop.